destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
If I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Monday, March 14th, 2022. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, investigative reporter at The Intercept, author of Code Over Country, The Tragedy and Corruption of SEAL Team 6. Matthew Cole will be joining us. And then we'll talk to Jack Crosbie, writer at the Discourse blog, correspondent at Rolling Stone magazine, also co-writer of Majority Report's AM Quickie on his reporting from Ukraine. Also on the program, Russia bombs Western Ukrainian military base 11 miles from the Polish border. White House approves another $200 million in weapons to Ukraine as the so-called self-appointed problem solvers in Congress call for even more weapon sales. American reporter killed in Ukraine. Meanwhile, a leaked memo from the Kremlin emphasized the need to use Tucker Carlson for Russian propaganda. I'm clipping. You got to bring me down. Texas courts issue injunction on Texas law targeting parents who seek medical care for transgender kids. China puts a northern province into near lockdown over an Omicron outbreak. Should also say a Texas Supreme Court shuts down the final challenge to that Texas abortion ban. Yesterday, a 2-year anniversary of the killing of Breonna Taylor. And today is the 139th anniversary. Maybe we got our math wrong. Not sure. Of when Karl Marx died. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Apologize for our audio snafus. Hopefully, it has been fixed at the moment. Still working on these things.
It's going to be a lot better soon, though, folks.
Going to be a lot better soon. We're working through this. Oh, that is the voice of Matt Leck, who has returned from his vacation to a...
Oh, there he is! I'm back in the seat.
Back in the seat. We greeted him with a huge pile of wires. It said, fix this. And so we just had to work out the new levels. The gain is too high for both you and Leck, Train Boy says, who I met the other day at, well, I should say I saw again at the other day at the live podcast of the Bituation Room. I don't know if we call it a podcast, live show, Bituation Room. Hopefully that's a little bit better.
Train Boy is also a podcast boy. He likes to go to podcast stuff. I've seen him at our live shows before.
Yes. I didn't mean to say meet. I meant to say again, saw. Hopefully our audio is better. Can we get some feedback maybe from Dorsey can help on that? Meanwhile, just one note, I got an email from a listener, Tim, and in response to a segment we did about Laura Ingraham the other day, Laura Ingraham was doing a piece where she was talking about the the idea that that gay people would in any way let younger elementary school kids know that they were gay, or that 5 and 6 year olds would get any type of education in the schools that dealt with their bodily autonomy, feeling good about themselves. You got to pull me down a little bit more. Bodily autonomy, those type of issues. And during the course of that segment, I said, I'm paraphrasing, but something to the effect of like, you know, the vast majority of people will become sexual beings, human beings, as they get older. So they're not being taught to be sexual. They're being taught aspects of their sexuality, which is going to come naturally. And at one point, I said something to the effect of people who are well-adjusted. There are people, and Tim points this out for me, there are people who grow up or who are born asexual and continue to be asexual. And I did not mean to stigmatize folks like that. Vast majority of people are sexual, but that is not, there is nothing wrong with you psychologically if you happen to be one of those people or kids or adults who are asexual. And I just want to make that clear. And I appreciate, Tim catching that for me and apologize for not making that clear and noting that in the moment of that segment. So appreciate the feedback there. As we said in the headlines, the Russian assault on Ukraine continues unabated. There continue to be talks. They are at this point really going nowhere. Russians bombed a base about 11 miles from the Polish border where there had been NATO exercises, or I shouldn't say NATO exercises, but NATO states that came in and provided training for Ukrainian soldiers, I think, at one point, not at this time. And so the conflict continues. There's pressure for Biden coming from some of the war hawks in the Senate to provide fighter jets to Ukraine. We just sent another $200 million worth of weapons, or the White House okayed that. Here is former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. He is on the Rachel Maddow show. This clip has gone viral, and with good reason. And we're seeing a lot of, well, let's listen to his clip here.
And I want to just say one other thing. I was just on Ukrainian television just 30 minutes ago. Brave journalists, just like our team covering the war there in Kiev. And one of the commentators said something interesting about how horrific this war is. And remember, these are people who suffered under fascism, that fought the Nazis. As the Nazis came and then the Red Army came back through. One of the Russian journalists said, there's one difference between Hitler when he was coming in and Putin. Hitler didn't kill ethnic Germans. He didn't kill German-speaking people. That's I think people need to remember that when we're talking about cities like Kharkiv and Mariupol and Kiev, there are large populations there, up to a third and sometimes as much to a half that are Russian speakers and are ethnic Russians. And yet Putin doesn't seem to care about that. He slaughters the very people he said he's come to liberate.
There's a lot of things that are problematic about this moment here. Now, some people have said, well, he's just quoting somebody else, but he's quoting somebody else because he's just found somebody who said what he wanted to say in a more articulate way than he brought up, or he agrees with the sentiment. First off, You don't need to say what Putin is doing is wrong when you see images of them bombing Ukrainians by saying that Hitler wasn't even as this bad. You don't need to do that. It's also just an absurd claim at this point. Tens of millions of people died in World War II. Without even getting into the specifics, it's an insane claim at this point. It also implies, well, let me get to that in a moment. And then we should also say, it's also not true. I don't know. You want to talk about just the Jews in Germany? I've got some news for Michael McFaul. Guess what language they spoke? Many of them spoke German. In fact, a huge number of them spoke German. They had been emancipated from the I guess religious world in Germany in like the 1830s, I think it was. But we should also say, like, this comparison is done to imply that Putin will not stop with Ukraine, that this is a juggernaut that is going to blow through Europe. I mean, because that's what Hitler did. And if this guy's worse than Hitler, I don't think that there's anyone who genuinely believes this. It may have been the case that Putin had designs on other former, I want to say Soviet republics, but, you know, I think it has more to do with the Russian Empire. But regardless, but it's quite clear that the plan's not going the way that it meant to. You don't need to say that this is worse than World War II or has the potential to be, because it won't unless that type of rhetoric is promoted, in which case we couldn't end up engaging in a World War III. So there was the amount of things that were wrong with that were, you know, pretty astonishing. And then I don't even know how to like interpret this. Michael McFaul then gets on Twitter and says, after a long, I guess he meant to say evening, he sort of dropped that, of commentary that started with Morning Joe and end with Maddow, I slipped late last night and violated an unwritten taboo. Look, this is not even like, let me start with an excuse that is also sort of like a humble brag. And then let me go into saying, like, I made a boo-boo and I violated an unwritten taboo. In other words, I violated something that is really sort of like, I mean, when you think about the word taboo, right?
Like superstitious.
Yes. The implication is in some way like, oh, this is something that is really a reflection of people's problems more than that they impose on society, more than this was not, I don't know what the taboo is. And here he goes, tells us, never compare Hitler with anyone. No, actually, you can compare Hitler with other people, but don't make ridiculous, stupid comparisons, one that are meant to generate a war lust. And then he goes on to say, I agree. He was incomparably evil. I won't do it again. And okay, but that's not, I mean, yeah, okay. But you also were wrong on the facts in your comparison. And then he followed up with, to those who wrote me to explain Hitler committed the same atrocities against ethnic Germans that Putin is committing. I don't know what he means by, I don't know what he's trying to say by ethnic Germans. I guess here is where he's trying to say, like, not Jewish people,
right,
who were born in Germany, who were German citizens, who were German. They were German Jews. And I don't know what he's saying, ethnic Russians in Ukraine. I don't understand what the point is he's talking about here. Now, of course, there were also Germans, or I guess, I don't know what ethnic Germans mean, but there were ethnic Germans that Hitler. But here he is now trying to split. Now he's not only not like sort of like pulling back on his apology, he's now just sort of saying like, but I was actually right. Against ethnic Russians today in Mariupol and Kharkiv, please suggest to me, I guess he meant suggest, to me the best scholarly readings on history. I'm eager to learn. Now, if it's the case that our ambassador to Russia does not know where to go outside of Twitter for scholarly work on the history of Hitler's assault on Germans, that's really puts it makes us question, why is this guy on from Morning Joe to Maddow talking about this? But really what it is, it's more about him saying, him just being, this is also part of my non-apology, which is to say like, oh, if you think you're so smart, point to me a citation in a book that uses the term, I don't even know if you can find it, ethnic Germans, where you can show me the sentence, Hitler bombed ethnic Germans. It's conceivable there were ethnic Germans living in Poland, ethnic Germans living in England and in France and in other places. I mean, I don't know what he's trying to, you made a mistake, apologize, and then walk away. But the arrogance of these people and the arrogance, he's gone on to other places and talking about like, this whole thing about World War III is a little overblown. I mean, honestly,
demonstrate some credibility on stuff first before you start reassuring me about World War III. Thank you.
Absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. All right, in a minute, we're going to be talking to Matthew Cole and then later Jack Crosbie. Hey, folks, job market still going strong. Many people have switched their jobs during this great resignation, and they're looking for better jobs, looking for better pay, and that's a good thing. But how are you going to find the right person to work for you? Well, you can do what we did here at the Majority Report when we were fishing around for a new producer back in the day. I think ZipRecruiter had advertised with us. I had never used it, although I played around with it. And we used it. And ultimately, that's how we got Brendan on the show, through ZipRecruiter. And ZipRecruiter's artificial intelligence, it's always learning. So if you're hiring, their AI gets better and faster at finding the right candidates for all your roles. Right now, you could try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter uses its powerful technology to find and match the right candidates up with your job. Then it proactively presents these candidates to you. ZipRecruiter, I think, actually reached out and brought the job to Brendan, and Brendan came to us that way. You can easily review these recommended candidates, invite your top choices to apply for your job, which encourages them to apply faster. They have a great, what is that? User interface, UI, and organizes everything for you, makes hiring so much easier. It's no wonder ZipRecruiter, it's the #1 rated hiring site in the US based on G2 ratings. Now you can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's ZipRecruiter.com/majority, MAJORITY. ZipRecruiter, it is the smartest way to hire. Also, it's been a rough couple of years, as you know, continues to be rough, frankly, in many respects. You got stress, anxiety, fatigue. Question is, are they eroding your mental health? I would probably bet yes.
So the question is how fast?
Exactly. Well, the question is, what can you do on a daily basis that will have a huge impact on your long-term happiness and well-being? You can use Headspace. Headspace is an app. It's scientifically proven to help you manage your feelings and your mental health. In fact, a recent study proved in just 2 weeks of Headspace, you can reduce your stress by 14%. Once you download the Headspace app, you try their mindfulness routines. It takes just a few minutes a day to change your relationship with stress and anxiety to start feeling better. Doesn't matter if you want to relieve stress or anxiety or sleep better or improve your focus, Headspace is your everyday dose of mindfulness for real life. Now, I have said for years that it's very difficult for me to try and do any type of meditation. I can't measure how much less stress I have and this and that, but I can tell you, I will say this. I'm yelling at the kids less. That's basically it. And by kids, I don't mean these guys. I'll work on that. But for me, I do my mindfulness because I can't sit still for any period of time except for when I'm, behind a mic talking. When I walk, Headspace has a walking mindfulness meditation that guides you as you're walking. And I do a lot of walking, and it has been incredibly helpful to learn to do that. And I think ultimately my goal is to be able to do this when I'm not moving. It may take a while, but if I get there, it's going to be because of Headspace. However you're feeling, try Headspace at headspace.com/majority and get 1 month free off of their entire mindfulness library. This is the best Headspace offer available. So go to headspace.com/majority today. Headspace.com/majority. We will put these links in our podcast and YouTube descriptions. Check them out. 1 month free at Headspace. Get some free stuff at ZipRecruiter. You're supporting the show, and these are great products, both of them. We need to take a quick break, and when we do, we'll be back with Matthew Cole, investigative reporter at The Intercept, author of Code Over Country, The Tragedy and Corruption of SEAL Team 6. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Matthew Cole. He's an investigative reporter at The Intercept and author of the new book, Code Over Country, The Tragedy and Corruption of SEAL Team 6. Matthew, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
All right, let's start with, I guess the obvious place to start is, where did SEAL Team 6 come from? I mean, what was the genesis of, actually, even before we get there, what is SEAL Team 6? I mean, I think people, have a vague notion, but where does it fit within the context of our military services?
Sure. It's what the military classifies as a tier 1 unit. It is a elite organization within or draws from the larger Navy SEALs. So it's a command based at Virginia Beach that's made up of about 300 SEALs who are the top 10% of all SEALs, right? And the only other unit that essentially is their equal is the Army's Delta Force, and they exist in a state of 24-hour readiness at all times. So in other words, they are literally the 300, and they sometimes refer to themselves as the president's own because they deploy when effectively the president authorizes them to leave the country for a mission. That was certainly how they began. So they are the best of the best within Navy Special Operations, and are the best, among the best, if not the best, in the military altogether for Special Operations. And of course, they're primarily best known as the unit that killed Osama bin Laden and saved Captain Phillips from the Somali pirates in 2009.
Why are they drawn from the Navy as opposed to another service?
Well, the SEALs come from a long history, going back to World War II, of what are called frogmen or Navy combat swimmers, and they were just a portion of the Navy that would at that time deploy off of ships into the Pacific and in Europe to scout for the defenses along a shoreline where Navy forces and Marines were going to land and charge in from the sea. And they did a combination of things, scouting topographically beneath the water to understand, what they had to worry about defensively, and also blow things up with explosives to move things out of the way that might be impediments. And that unit, or there were actually a couple of units at the time, and they eventually coalesced into what became known as the Underwater Demolition Teams, the UDT, and were deployed in the Korean War. And then President Kennedy authorized a new organization for naval special warfare that became known as the SEALs, the Sea, Air, Land Teams, and that designate and identifies essentially how they can end up in a mission or a war. They can come by air, they can come by land, and primarily, obviously, they can come by sea. And that differentiates them from every other special operations force with the Army and the Air Force, because obviously water is what the Navy does.
So what is the genesis of, maybe you just gave it to us a little bit there, but when we talk about SEAL Team 6, what was the genesis of this? Part of it I know comes out of the Iran, or the fallout from the Iran hostage crisis.
That's right. There was a failed mission. Some of your viewers may remember, many will not. There was a failed mission in 1979 to get the American hostages who had been held at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran out. At the time, there was a unit then known, actually I don't remember what it was known then, but it's what we now know as Delta Force, was sent in, and there was a mishap with helicopters and plane at a staging point in the desert. And so afterwards, the Pentagon and then President Carter authorized the creation of a new counterterrorism and hostage rescue capability within the military. That became known as the Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC. And then the Navy was able to add a unit for itself, which became the SEAL Team 6. And it was named, it was intentionally misnamed to throw off, at that time, the Soviet military into thinking that there were more SEAL teams than there were. In fact, there were only 2 SEAL teams at the time, and they just gave it the number 6, and that was the genesis of how it developed.
It's sort of crazy to think that, like, just by naming it number 6 would be like, oh, well, I mean, why wasn't it like SEAL Team, 1500 or something?
It was random that way. The unit was created by a SEAL officer named Commander Richard Marcinko, who had been a Vietnam veteran, highly decorated, and it was just part of the disinformation to help with its coverage. It was highly classified. It still is highly classified, although you wouldn't necessarily know it from popular culture. And it was fit in with the ethos of trying to mislead your enemy and your adversary to protect something that was quite secret at the time.
And so, give us a sense of, this starts in the early 80s, I guess. I mean, somewhere around there. I mean, 1980. And where, I mean, the book obviously outlines how the Navy SEALs have become problematic, I guess. I don't know how else. I mean, it's a wide range of problems here. But how did it start? I mean, in terms of like, what was the idea in terms of its use, and when did things start to go off the rails, or was it the way that SEAL Team 6 was constructed was already off the rails?
Well, let me go back just slightly to reframe that question. The SEALs themselves, and from, as I was describing the history of what were known euphemistically as frogmen and combat swimmers, were always a very unique breed culturally within the Navy. And in fact, what later became was that they were totally outside of the Navy. They were drawing men who were, by any measure, extremely tough, very brave. Their job at the time was to slip off of ships into the sea with nothing more than flippers and goggles and a knife, sometimes with a bag of explosives, right? They were unarmed, and then go and scout up close, the defenses of land that the Marines and the Navy were going to try to land and take. It was, it's a hair-raising job, and they had, even then, culturally, they were self-selecting. They were physically incredibly fit, and they were, essentially within the culture of the larger Navy, they were the rogues, they were pirates, and so in time, that's part of the DNA of what became SEALs. So it's always there, and then you get the development of SEAL Team 6, which is this hyper-specialized, extremely elite unit whose job at the end of the day, fundamentally, is hostage rescue and killing. I mean, they are within special operations forces, and certainly within Navy special operations, they are, the best killers, the most effective, the most judicious. And from their screening process and from their beginning, they have in their DNA this comes from Dick Marcinko, who just recently died this past Christmas, and the obituaries referred to him frequently as very colorful. But in fact, he was a lot more than that. He was brilliant. He was profane. He was a liar. He was a killer. He was a fabulist, and he was also an incredible alcoholic. And so, at the beginning of SEAL Team 6, one of the standards that was created, unofficially, to join the unit was the ability to drink with Dick Marcinko. If you could drink with the skipper and hold your alcohol, and you came recommended elsewhere, you were going to make it, right? That was part of, a good portion of the selection process. So at its outset, SEAL Team 6 has this DNA, this imprint that is Commander Marcinko. And as he said to me in interviews on the record before he died, was that he created the unit like a mafia, in which he was the Don, he was the godfather, and the secrets of the teams had to stay within the teams. Any problems had to, and he had a rationale for it, which was he was trying to stand up a unit that would be ready at any time to answer the president's call to deploy somewhere, around the world to carry out the president's orders. And so he didn't have time to deal with Navy regulations and personnel issues, right? So it had to stay inside. That element, while the unit professionalized enormously after Marcinko and in the decades before 9/11 and obviously since 9/11, that cultural imprint, that DNA is there. It's still there. And it is part of, the subtitle in the book is Tragedy and Corruption. And the subtitle of the book could have been The Secrets of SEAL Team 6, but it's these men live and operate on a knife's edge, and it requires an enormous amount of discipline and oversight to keep them from going off the rails. And when they don't have that, it's easy for them to slip off. And that's certainly what happened at the beginning of the unit and how they were created. And it absolutely happened once after 9/11.
What was it about 9/11 that began to, or were there examples, let's say in the 20 years prior to 9/11 that it was in existence, that were indicative of these problems?
Well, yeah, there were a quiet history of, drug problems, drug use, drug dealing, theft. They at the beginning, in fact, actually, Marcinko, in a list, I should have added a list of things that Marcinko describes him. He's also a convicted felon. And it came from a fraud scheme that he had cooked up with another former member of the unit. Now, it happened after he was out of SEAL Team 6, but he used SEAL Team 6 as the basis to get a fake contract for grenades. And the reason why it was initially successful and used it was because the procurement system within SEAL Team 6 had so little oversight by necessity. They had to be able to call up a manufacturer and get something instantly, right? And so everything was sped up much faster than it would be in larger Navy and certainly within the regular SEAL teams. He used that to try to enrich himself, and he later was convicted and spent a year and change in prison. So those things would pop up from time to time, and then what happens is it's not that there was something about 9/11. It's that 9/11, after the U.S. invaded Afghanistan and the SEALs were inserted, it began 20 years of war, and became an unprecedented amount of exposure to war, to war fighting that any American unit has ever seen. And that's what I think the general public probably doesn't have a sense or recognition that there is no other time in U.S. history when we sent off men to experience and engage in this much combat. There literally is no precedent for it. And so the effects and the traumas that come with that start to play themselves out throughout the war. And when you have a unit that has this much autonomy, you are, on paper, you're ripe for problems. If you have a unit that has this sort of strain of, lack of accountability, integrity issues, failure to police itself, you get what the title really is, which is a code of silence, a code of corruption that persists, unfortunately, till today.
Where else? And we'll get to the Green Memo in a bit, but how far did that code go? In other words, was there, who was in, I guess, immediate command once you get out of the command structure of SEAL Team 6 itself? Like, where would the accountability rise to? And what was the attitude, I guess, of the Navy at that point, which was like, yes, we're having reports of this or that, but the bottom line is they're getting stuff done. Do we have a sense of what that dynamic was?
Yeah, first of all, even though they are of the Navy, they're not really of the Navy, right? They are attached to and report to JSOC, which is in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and so your immediate, the place that can has a chance to do some policing or oversight and accountability starts there, right? You have a 3 or 4 star, 3-star flag officer who oversees the unit in terms of how it's used and utilized. And then from there, you basically get Congress and the Pentagon. There isn't actually by design a lot of red tape. The real issue is that when they've had problems, the main thing is to keep it essentially on the battlefield, right? To keep it at a lower level so that you don't have flag officers who are forced to face with accusations or allegations. If the allegations don't rise, if they remain essentially on the battlefield, investigated there and then covered up, there really isn't a problem. And that's what the unit, for a good 15 years, from 2001 till 2015, really until 2017, when 2 members of SEAL Team 6 murdered a Green Beret in the West African nation of Mali, is when you the problems at SEAL Team 6 spill out beyond the command in Virginia Beach.
Let's talk about some of those incidents that take place over there. I mean, they range from, the Norgrove, I guess, mission that goes wrong to the killing, like you say, in Mali. What other, maybe tell us about the Norgrove mission as an example of a mission that goes awry, but what else are we seeing? And is there a trajectory in terms of these problems, or is it we just start getting, problems every 6 months, or how does that? I mean,
let me add a little context here, and let's place this situate this a little better. First of all, SEAL Team 6 is just like Delta, the premier military unit for special operations, right? If you were an American held hostage abroad, you absolutely would want SEAL Team 6 to be the guys who are sent in to potentially rescue you. They're incredibly talented. They're really good at what they do. They are the best of the best, and they are, as a majority, great guys. Men who are incredibly skilled with plenty of integrity. So we're not talking about a unit that has nothing but rogues and criminals. What happens is that after 9/11, and where I what my sources always pointed to post 9/11 was this first serious battle, and the first casualty of one of their own that happens in March of 2002 that became known as the Battle of Roberts Ridge, early in Afghanistan, war in Afghanistan. And, they lost one of their own. He was mutilated and treated savagely by the enemy. And there was, in the immediate aftermath, a bloodlust, a need for revenge from some of his teammates, not all. And frankly, looking back on it, it was the first exposure of real up-close combat that any of them in the unit had faced, right? There were very few members of SEAL Team 6 who were in Mogadishu for the Black Hawk Down incident in 1993. In many ways, until 9/11 happened, SEAL Team 6 was the JV to Delta Force's varsity in terms of just preference and how often they were used. And so they come to the war, a lot in the same way that most Americans did, right? 9/11 happens, we send our forces in, and we start getting back these images and video and experiences of things that we hadn't seen before, hadn't seen since Vietnam. And so for SEAL Team 6, that story is very similar. And so it goes from there, and it starts, it's deployment after deployment. It's not, to answer your question, was it every 6 months? No, it's as they moved forward and operated, and they were incredibly successful. They were incredibly lethal and judicious most of the time. They were, not infrequently committing war crimes. There was a lot of bodily desecrations was sort of the thing, but that is just part of the sort of when there were violations of the laws of war or ethical and moral violations. The problem was that the unit could not police itself. I mean, and that part goes for 20 years. I mean, it literally could not police itself. It's kind of phenomenal, actually. And you know, in a lot of ways, you know, I try to say that my book, Code Over Country, is the secrets of SEAL Team 6. But the truth is that nearly everything in the book is very well known inside the SEAL community, inside the special operations community. It's only secret to the public because they've been so successful, and the military, it's not just them, the larger military has been so successful at branding the Navy SEALs and SEAL Team 6 as this unambiguously heroic unit and group of men who, you know, can fire 3 shots and take down 3 people simultaneously, you know, sort of godlike and heroic. And the truth, and the necessary truth, is much, much more problematic and troubling. And, you know, that was the genesis of the book.
And that's what led Rear Admiral Colin Green, who looked at a review. Apparently there was a review that said things are fine, more or less. And he rebuked that review. Tell us just how that happened. And presumably when he says we have a problem, that's what he's talking about. There is no, these things happen, but we have no way to, there's no accountability, and we have no way of imposing any type of discipline on this unit.
Yeah, well, so when he was speaking specifically, it was about the larger naval special warfare. So it includes SEAL Team 6 and then the rest of the what they call the white side of the Navy SEALs, the less classified. But it's important to remember that the SEAL Team 6 it's the very top of the SEAL community, right? So what happens there, what starts there, trickles down, because if you are a regular non-SEAL Team 6 member of the SEAL community, they're the ones who are idolized. That's a position that many, you know, strive to get into because it is the best of the best, and they get the most funding and the most training. And so you have, and as a SEAL, you get more pay if you're in SEAL Team 6. To answer that question, I'll just go back 1 second to the question before, which is that historically, and really up until the moment that Admiral Colin Green writes to his force and says, we have a problem, every time there was some kind of incident, that allegation, you know, problem, the SEALs and SEAL Team 6 were very successful in describing it as a one-off, a singular bad apple who had done something, a one-time event where circumstances were, you know, sort of a perfect storm of ingredients led to this thing. And what what Green finally was able to articulate was, and it was in very few words because, you know, this was public and unclassified, was that no, this problem is more than just one incident. There's a virus here in our community that has started long before this ever occurred, and it sort of flares up. You know, whether it flares up every 6 months or every 6 weeks, they're part of the same problem, right? It's not that you know, every incident is directly related to the other, but it is this cultural issue which exists to this day, as I say, in which when problems happen, the first instinct is to circle the wagons, keep it within the team, and cover it up, right? They will mete out accountability and punishment on the individual level within their group, but they will not let the outside world or anyone above them know what really went on. And so the culture of lying, of, you know, lying by omission and otherwise just, you know, directly lying, is incredibly strong. I mean, really strong. And it's notable. I will say this as an outsider. I think one of the things that surprised me most in all the years of reporting that I've done about SEAL Team 6 and the SEALs is that this is one of the trademark characteristics within the military, outside of the SEALs, is the lack of integrity and the dishonesty. And it's sort of, you know, you sort of, and I'm a father with 3 kids, and you sort of say, if you you know, you let your kid continue to lie, or you don't provide some kind of you know, discipline, what do your kids learn, right? And that's what we're looking at with the SEALs 20 years into the post 9/11 wars into the forever wars is that the only lesson that they've learned is that as long as they're successful on the battlefield, they'll get away with it, and they have.
So, what is being done, if anything, and and what should be done at this point, and where will we be in 20 years if it's not done?
Oh, that's a great question, a great series of questions. I think in talking to, it's important to remember, and I think as I do interviews about the book, there is a lot of criticism of, I wouldn't say a lot, but there's criticism of, oh, I must be anti-SEAL, I must hate the SEALs, or I must hate the men and women who wear uniforms. And of course, it couldn't be further from the truth. This kind of investigative journalism comes from people inside the community, senior members of SEAL Team 6 with 20 and in some cases 30 years inside, who tried to fix things and couldn't. And so they eventually turn, of course, to journalists, as they should, I think. And in interviews with them over the years, I've asked this question: well, what should be done? What can be done? No one within the SEAL community is calling for, their peers to go to jail and to be tried for criminal activity. And looking back in the euphemism of our day, there is a notion that there is either needs to be some kind of reconciliation or a mandate to present a investigation into the history of SEAL Team 6 and the SEALs, with the proviso that no one is going to be punished, but for instance, perhaps end the careers. I mean, it's like a truth and reconciliation tribunal. And the Australians and their special forces had a similar problem, and they've done something like that. They did a huge report that they made public, and it was they were calling for criminal investigations, or at least referrals to them. It doesn't look like any of that will happen. But what it certainly did is it ended careers, and that's the first step. Is that there is a whole generation of Navy SEAL Team 6 officers whose careers should end, not because they're fired, but just end naturally. Just no more going up. And there's probably an entire generation beneath them that came up under them that have to also just be pushed aside. That's the first step. The second step would normally be, you'd have to have congressional committees, the Senate and House Armed Services Committee, open this up and look at this along with the Navy. There is a admiral now, a 2-star named Wyman Howard, who is currently the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare out in Coronado, who has implemented some changes that are positive, largely having to do with trimming down the size of the force and how much is deployed. But there is a great irony in he replaced Admiral Green in 2020, and he was a commander at SEAL Team 6 who procured custom-made hatchets for his men, who took them out onto the battlefield and used them, not all of them, but they were used to desecrate bodies. He rose to becoming commander of SEAL Team 6. He's obviously at great heights with 2 stars. And so it's very much a case of the Navy putting the fox in to guard the hen house. And, when he was originally tapped to get the job, I got calls from officers and the enlisted on the inside from SEALs who couldn't believe that this was their choice for cleaning up, right? He had a mandate to clean up the SEALs and fix this stuff. And it's not possible when you were part of the problem and certainly emblematic of the corruption, the cultural corruption at SEAL Team 6 and the larger Navy SEAL Team community. So it's another example, unfortunately, of sort of total tone deafness from the SEALs. And it's I think the answer to the question lies with what the book really is in many ways is a case study in failed leadership. And it's something that any corporation, corporate structure would look at and could identify easily in the human the the HR department would be able to identify these problems, right? It's not actually that difficult, but because they're so good and because they're so special and because we have put them up on a pedestal culturally, keep in mind that the SEALs are the single greatest recruiting tool that the Navy has. They get more recruitment from people wanting to join to become Navy SEALs, even though, a small fraction can actually make it, that they have a real value for the Navy and the military. And so it's insulated them from any kind of accountability. And I think that the end of the wars, such as they are in Afghanistan and Iraq, are probably as good a time as any to have a real chance of, a real look in the mirror. And for the, as I say, the Pentagon, the civilian leaders of the military and Congress to enforce some kind of accountability here to try to fix the problem.
Matthew Cole, investigative reporter at The Intercept, author of Code Over Country, The Tragedy and Corruption of SEAL Team 6. We will put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks you so much, Sam.
All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, Jack Crosbie, writer at the Discourse blog, correspondent for Rolling Stone, just upon returning from several weeks in Ukraine. We'll be right back after this. Don't worry.
We'll see.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland still on vacation, I should say. Guess I realized I forgot to say that up front. I was so excited to have Matt and, Bradley's been here, but have Matt back from his vacation. Also back, but not from a vacation, is Jack Crosbie. He is a writer at the Discourse blog, also a correspondent at Rolling Stone magazine, where he was sent on their behalf to report from Ukraine. Jack, welcome back.
Sam, thanks for having me. Good to be back.
Glad you made it through that safely. We just had a report of a U.S. reporter who was killed in Ukraine yesterday. I want to talk just sort of like broadly what you saw while you were there, and then we'll get into there's a couple of pieces about the refugees and what you think NATO can actually do while you're there. But give us a sense of, I guess, I hopefully folks have been reading your reporting in Rolling Stone and saw you on MSNBC talking about what you saw. But give us a sense of, now that you're back, and I imagine still sort of adjusting to returning, what that experience was like. This is the first time you'd covered any type of war, right?
No. So I was in Ukraine in 2015. I'd covered this war before. So I went out after finishing graduate school. I went out to Ukraine in 2015, and I was out there for about sort of off and on for about 9 months. You'd get like a 90-day tourist visa, so I'd be out there for like 3 months, and then I'd go back and stay with my cousin in England for a couple of weeks and like get some R&R, and then I'd go back out there for another 3 months. But it was, I mean, this trip was drastically different. I had always wanted to do foreign reporting like that. I'd done reporting from Southeast Asia and stuff like that in the like early 2010s. And like, it wasn't like completely my first rodeo, but then this trip out was definitely, the intensity was different, I think. My first trip in 2015, it was very, the war at that point had kind of sort of like stagnated. Like the front lines were very much set. It was one of these kind of post-Soviet like frozen conflicts that you see in Transnistria and until recently in Nagorno-Karabakh and even in Georgia and stuff like that. And so that was kind of how it was from when I was there until 2015 until February the 24th of this year.
And so give us a sense of that, because, we hear people, there are some who argue that what we're seeing now is a culmination of an 8-year conflict, that this is part of that it is an extension of it. I mean, when we hear, 14,000 people died since 2014. When did the bulk of those deaths occurred? When you say, the battle lines were basically stagnant, was it like every day we send over 2 shells, they send over 2 shells, and where were those shells going and coming from?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the bulk of the death in the initial conflict after Russia's sort of first invasion of Ukraine in 2014 happened in the first year of the war. But then it was 8 years kind of attrition. So in that first year of the war from sort of mid 2014 to mid 2015, there was a huge amount of fighting and a lot of like sort of changing and shifting in the front lines. Like towns came under one control and then were recaptured and stuff like that. So it was a very fluid, very hot war.
This is in the east of Ukraine and in the Donbass region, right?
Yeah, so this is all localized to that region of eastern Ukraine, sort of centralized around the 2 major cities out there, which are Donetsk and Luhansk, which are both sort of like the capital cities of the respective oblasts, which is like a state, basically. And so what had happened, just in very brief, in 2014, kind of as a response to this popular revolution that had thrown out Ukraine's very much sort of pro-Russian government that was trying to it's getting into the roots of the entire like revolution, but essentially there were a lot of people in the country that did not want stronger economic ties to Russia, which was very much the direction that the government was taking them. Then you had this revolution, which is a very complicated and nuanced thing. There were all kinds of different groups with different aims in it, but it resulted in a new government. Russia didn't like that. They wanted to exert more power over Ukraine, which resulted in the annexation of Crimea, and then this sort of support of these nascent separatist groups. It's weird to say because there really wasn't like a hardline separatist movement in these areas before 2014. It was something that was like, I'm sure there was some actual support there, but a huge amount of it was kind of astroturfed. And then certainly a huge amount of the actual like military and gains that were made in this section of the country was Russian regular troops without insignia and advisors and everything like that coming through and essentially invading Ukraine at that time. So a lot of the death happened early then, but then after the lines had sort of solidified, it was 8 years of attrition. It was the Ukrainians shelling the pro-Russian separatists and the pro-Russian separatists shelling the Ukrainians. And, both sides, I think, were confirmed to have used cluster munitions. There were artillery strikes on civilians and stuff. But it was very much sort of like from 2015 onward, kind of a low flame of war, I think, that just consistently ate up lives, but wasn't like, anything on the scale of what we're seeing right now.
You head over there, like, I think it was a week before the actual bombing started. Was that right? Yeah,
about 10 days, I think. I went over there on February 12th, and I think the war started February 24th. Right. Okay. I'm not great with dates here. The days, like, it's honestly, I understand. It's just an enormous blur.
I would imagine, but I do recall that when you were heading over there, we were thinking that you would be able to, that you'd be back relatively soon, and hopefully you wouldn't have seen any war. Had you gone, later, you that would not have been an open question. I asked that because we have a clip of the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko and Russian President Vladimir Putin. They met Saturday, 2 days ago, and I believe this translation is correct that we translated. But the argument is that this invasion was necessary as a preemptive strike. It just, when I hear preemptive, because I'm old, I just remember, Condi Rice and, Richard Pearl and, what was it? Wolfstein. I can't even remember his name now. And of course, Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and all of them talking about, you don't want the mushroom cloud to be you don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud. And that's where the preventative or preemptive war. And here is Lukashenko saying, you had to do this, President Putin, because it was preventive. Let's play this.
We weren't the ones to attack them because the Ukrainian army started shelling. When I visited last time, we were sitting in a helicopter and we were getting those reports. So they were the ones who started. And I will show you now from where they prepared an attack, assault against Belarus. And if we didn't assault them preemptively, they would have assaulted our forces, Belarusian and Russian, who were part of the exercises. So we weren't the ones who started this assault. Our conscience is clear because look, biological weapons, the largest nuclear power station, power plant, and they were ready to blow it up. Now we see what's happening in Chernobyl. You ask me to give them power, and they don't even need this. They don't even think about that.
As far as your reporting, you're not omniscient. You were there. You had a sense of it. Like, what part of that is true?
None of it. None of it.
Fair enough.
Absolutely none of it. I mean, the Russian campaign to create a pretext to this war has been even lazier and more openly, transparently false than the U.S. campaign to create a run-up to create a pretext for the invasion of Iraq. Like,
I think, from my experience, the run-up to the Iraq War was like a year and a half long. I mean, it was there was a lot of effort put into this. A tremendous.
This was like an Iraq War speed run. It was basically like, it's absolutely absurd.
Give me a sense of what your take is on this bioweapon thing, because, I don't know that you would have necessarily any particular insights, but were you aware, at the very least, were you aware of that this was one of the the casus bellis. I'm saying this wrong, but the one of the reasons why Putin went on and gave a speech as to why they were about to invade, or why they had begun to invade Ukraine. It dealt with denazification. It dealt with corruption. It dealt with a return, NATO threats. It dealt with a reconstituting of Russian Empire. Ukraine didn't really exist, et cetera, et cetera. Had you heard anything about? We also have to go in there because of the bio weapons that they're developing.
No, I mean that was a new one. That's a new one that's cropped up in recent days. It's interesting. So some of the pretext to war that they gave had been like sort of long running conspiracy theories. I wrote about them in a piece for Rolling Stone before the war, actually. But there's all this stuff about like Russian genocide and things like that. And then they're like new investigations into like mass graves in Donetsk and Luhansk and stuff like that. And I didn't see those graves. That was like, I think a few months before I got there, but I spoke to a bunch of journalists that I knew that were out there and stuff. One especially, it's in that Rolling Stone piece, who had like been in the area where this sort of like conspiracy fermented, which was basically, it was a town in the early days of the war that was shelled, I think by both sides, or it was shelled by one side and then the other side, and it eventually came under like separatist control, and basically power had been knocked out for the entire town. There were all these bodies in the morgue, but no refrigeration. And so the local authorities, which at the time were the separatists, like buried them in a large mass grave outside. And then what they've done years later is like the Russian government, which knew through its separatist proxies that this grave was there, have said, we're opening up an investigation into this mass grave. It's going to prove like Ukrainian genocide, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like journalists who had been there at the time were like, everyone knew about this. This was exactly the situation that had happened. Like this is a completely, empty pretext. So there were some of these conspiracies that they'd been talking about. And like the whole like Russian cultural genocide thing has been a running theme for the past 8 years. But this newer stuff, like the biolabs and things, I had not heard anything of that before. I mean, what he's saying about the nuclear power plant, like that's the nuclear power plant down in Zaporizhia, which is south of Dnipro or whatever. It's like, it's a nuclear power plant. Like, I don't know. His justification is like the Ukrainians were planning to blow it up. They were planning to like do Chernobyl again to their own power plant. It just like, it's ludicrous. I don't see why
that would be like me heading up to Indian power plant just up the river on the Hudson River and saying, I'm going to show Canada a thing or two and, and blowing it up. And everyone I know, it gets radiation poisoning.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's what they're alleging, basically. The biolabs thing. I don't know a huge amount about that, but I've seen some like really good sort of debunkings of that online from reputable sources. It appears that one of the main labs in question that they're talking about is up near the northeastern city of Kharkiv, where I was when the war started. And what it's basically, it was just like a biological research facility. We have them all over the place in the United States. They're in almost every country where, they're doing like research and they're handling sometimes certain pathogens and stuff like that. And I think the core of the conspiracy goes around that they were like destroying evidence or something like that. And it was all put down on paper. And then you have like actual, genetic and biological scientists saying like, no, what the paper is it's literal just documentation that these scientists, when the city got invaded, were like properly disposing of hazardous samples of material and stuff like that. So that you don't, someone doesn't crack a vial and then smallpox get. I don't think they had smallpox at that facility, but like Kharkiv, that whole area is like a massive university town. There's like 38 different universities there. There's medical schools. There's like, of course they would have those kind of labs up there. And like, maybe some of them got US funding at some point, but these are not like, it's not like weapons research labs. This was all like things that was like public and above board and like on paper. So this is it's spaghetti at the wall, and they're just throwing it to see what sticks.
Now, who is the audience here for this? Like when Lukashenko and Putin do this, and they are, generating obvious, fairly easily debunked lies by anybody who's on the ground and had access to a TV, I guess, or news. Who is the audience? Is it for Belarusians and Russians as a way of maintaining political, support or muting domestic dissent?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Because you hear from people, and I've spoken to Ukrainians who have family members in Russia, and especially now with this sort of recent purge of independent media outlets and stuff like that in Russia. But to a certain extent, it's basically Russia's media ecosystem is if an entire country only had access to like Fox News and Newsmax or whatever, and Trump were still in power and he fully controlled the agendas of all those networks, right? So it's if every single person in this country, the only news source that they had access to were like essentially state-owned and tools of the state that were feeding them a steady stream of disinformation and whatever. And I know there are watchers that are like, well, the U.S. news networks do propaganda and stuff like that on this. It's not even close to the same level. Like I've spoken to people who were being bombed in Ukraine who were like on the phone with relatives in Russia, and their relatives were being like, we don't believe you. Like it's not actually happening, So all of this is to just keep those societal controls in place in these respective dictators' constituencies.
Right. I mean, I think this is an important point to make. Like, I don't think it's right for YouTube to be pulling down shows that are, offering a different opinion on the Russian-Ukraine conflict. And particularly ones that are, sort of, frankly, are smaller in some regard. I think we have a problem with YouTube. I don't want to go back in. I don't want to relitigate that. But people should understand that when we say that that's problematic, it is not to. There is no comparison. It is maybe a way of saying, like, if this gets 20 times worse. Or 100 times worse, it could look like something like what's actually ongoing in Russia. I mean, we're watching footage of people holding up blank signs in Moscow, literally a sign that just says like nothing, and immediately getting arrested for holding up a sign. So the people should be aware of that. All right. So with that said, let's talk about, from your perspective, like there's a real tension here, right? And then we're seeing these images. We're watching people get bombed, a maternity ward in Mariupol, pregnant women being killed, which again, I also, I hope that we can learn from this and develop some empathy that we can also apply to other conflicts, that ones in which we have actually, more direct influence, frankly. But what do you think the U.S. response and the NATO response has been so far? And talk about that tension from what I would imagine the Ukrainians you were reporting on felt relative to the perspective that you have as an outsider.
Yeah. So, I've tried to put this into words before, but it's, when you speak to people in Ukraine, they want immediate NATO involvement. They want a no-fly zone. They want the West to join the war against Russia. In their perspective and in their opinion, World War III is already happening. And the only difference between the two outcomes is whether or not the West gets involved while there are still Ukrainians alive, or whether the West gets involved after Ukraine has been essentially wiped off the map and it's Poland next. That is their perspective. and it's very easy to see how they get that perspective, because they're being cluster bombed and artillery struck and massacred every single day. I think it's tough as an outsider. I don't really have anything that I can say to those people that makes it better when you speak to them like in person. Like there's nothing you can say. When you have the privilege of being able to take a step back from that, I think it's very clear to me and to a lot of people that immediate direct NATO involvement in this conflict would be absolutely catastrophic. And I think that there is still potentially a outcome to this that does not involve a wider war between Russia and NATO powers. I think we also sort of owe it to ourselves and to the Ukrainian people to be clear about what that means. And what that means is that they're going to die. And we're going to watch that happen. And I think, I think the Biden administration thus far has handled things about as well as they could have, at least since the war started. I think they've been smart to not do things like Obama did in Syria, to put red lines, to draw sort of arbitrary points in time when NATO involvement becomes secure. But I think also, like, as we're watching that happen, we need to be clear, like, whatever the US's role was in the lead up to this conflict, whatever. And, I honestly think this war was going to happen regardless of what NATO did in the build up to this. I think this war it's very clear that this is what Putin, who has now totalitarian control over the Russian state, what he wanted. But I do think that we need to be honest with ourselves that all of the diplomatic mistakes that 2 administrations, 3 administrations, for as far back as you want to go, of elected leaders in the US have made, have contributed to the situation that we see right now. And that in some respect, all of the death that is going to happen, part of that blood is on our hands. It's of course overwhelmingly more so on Vladimir Putin's hands. It was his decision to invade. I honestly am not sure in the past 5-10 years even what the West could have done to prevent that. But we're actors in this situation as well. And so,
we should say, I mean, I think it's important to say that for those people who say, like, now is not the time to mention this, people should know that, like, this critique about the expansion of NATO has been ongoing since prior to the expansion of NATO. I mean, these are critiques. You can go back. You can look at Moynihan making this argument. Then there's a lot of things I don't like about Daniel Moynihan, but that this critique was out there since the early 90s, since the fall of the Soviet Union, and has been, repeated through those years. So if this is the first time you're hearing this critique, it is because it's the first time that we're actually paying attention to it. And so, I mean, I think it's important to because I think you're right. I think we're about to basically sit on the sidelines and watch a horror unfold that we do not have the ability to stop. The only thing that we have an ability to influence is how it metastasizes. And so, all right, with that said, like, what is your sense of, I mean, this is the thing, like the idea I'm talking about today, the sending another $200 million worth of weapons. If there is a sense that Putin is going to roll through Ukraine in as bloody a manner as he can, essentially, does it make sense to send weapons? Should the U.S. at this point say, okay, we're going to promise that Ukraine is never a member of NATO, regardless, I don't know, I guess presumably call Putin's bluff on that accord. I don't know if it's right for the U.S. to, if Ukraine wants to be a part of NATO, I don't know that it's right. I don't think the U.S. should admit them, but to say like we're in charge of, whether they're a member of the EU or something to this effect, it's a very odd place to be in. Do you think that would end the fighting though? I mean, like what, like I guess there's a critique that the U.S. should be calling Zelensky and saying surrender now. What is your sense on that?
They're going to kill until they run out of bullets. There's no surrender. It doesn't matter. There's no, so I guess, I mean, it's tough. I understand the critiques about not like flooding Ukraine with weapons. We don't want to arm these right-wing militias. We don't, et cetera, et cetera. My sense from being there is that the Russian military has fully embraced a strategy similar to ones that they've used in Syria and in other conflicts. And they are going to, they're going to kill until they run out of bullets. And I think it's pretty much unarguable at this point that the U.S. weapons shipments that we have sent have made an enormous like strategic impact on those battlefields. I go back and forth on this constantly. I think with what we're seeing right now, it's like either I think the more the Ukrainian people are able to resist, potentially more of their own lives that they save. And I think also there's going to be this resistance no matter what. And if it's there's a lot of really thorny comparisons here, especially when you consider different factions and different conflicts that we've armed in the past and stuff like that. I don't necessarily see those as one-to-one comparisons. Like there's a very clear difference to me, I think, between providing weapons to the democratically elected government of a country that has been invaded and providing sort of ad hoc weapons deals to various shifting groups of non-state actors in countries that are currently in massive amounts of civil upheaval, right? Do I think it's definitely a problem if people with neo-Nazi tattoos are walking around with U.S. missile launchers? Like, yes, absolutely. But I think, at least in my experiencing, focusing on that micro, I'm not sure if that's enough of a reason. I don't know. I go back on this, but everything I have seen so far suggests that the Russian military and the Russian leadership is determined to inflict as much mass death and pain upon the Ukrainian people as they can.
I mean, don't they, from their perspective, have to now? Because success, it seems to me, was always a change of leadership, a coup in Ukraine. There was going to be a change of leadership. It was going to be more sympathetic to Russia. That the expectation of that happening, I think, was wildly tin-eared. I mean, like the idea, the ease in which that was going to happen was why. But it seems to me that if Putin is going to control Ukraine, which seems to be the agenda here, they're going to have to, from their perspective, this isn't just about getting to the point of control. This is about maintaining control later, which means that they have to impose as much destruction as possible on the society, both physically and like in terms of just human toll, so that they can control this country later. It seems to me, if they are not going to end, like I don't see they're either going to find it too costly to get that victory, and they're going to settle with, we want independence for these places in the Donbass or whatever it is, or they're going to try and control the whole country. And either one involves the most amount of infliction of death and destruction as possible. And there's no there's no incentive for them to stop based upon their agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, I mean, even in the places that the Russians already control, in cities like Mykolaiv and Kherson and stuff like that, the few urban centers that they have been able to like establish consistent control over, which is shockingly like not a whole lot. If you look, there's a whole bunch of like maps floating around of like what the Russians actually control. What they actually control is they control a few urban population areas in the south. They control, you know, Donetsk and Luhansk, the separatist controlled areas that they already had on that existing front line, which is shifted a bit. They've captured a few towns here and there. And then they control bits and pieces of like major highways and like arteries into Ukraine, like down sort of from Belarus down to outside of Kiev. Some of the highways around like almost encircling, but not quite Kharkiv and things like that. They're not holding large amounts of land. They're not holding large amounts of towns. They're not doing anything like this. And in the towns that they do hold, like there are street protests every single day of people that are coming out and protesting against the Russian occupation. And they're oftentimes, it seems like, you know, they're not taking some pains to not outright massacre those protesters immediately. But they're doing everything else. They're shooting people that try and leave. They're bombing humanitarian convoys, et cetera, et cetera. I think they know like they can't effectively control this country. So the only other option is that they try and kill it first, kill as many people as they can. If it's similar to Syria, if they depopulate areas through indiscriminate shelling, then they can control them because there's no people there. They can say, we control Mariupol. You saw this in a small town earlier today. There's a small town 40 miles outside of Donetsk called Volnovakha. It used to be a checkpoint town on the border. It was one of the towns you would go through if you were crossing over from Ukrainian-held side to the rebel-held side, which I did many times in 2015, back when the separatist areas were still allowing independent press in. I lived out there for a month and a half, so I've reported on both sides of this conflict line. You go through Volnovakha, it's a small town, about 20,000 people. The Russians now claim that they control Volnovakha, but in reality, it's basically wiped off the map. There's not an intact building in the town. The lives of the vast majority of its residents are unclear. Who knows what happens to them? There's no telecommunication, there's no water, there's no anything like this. So you're seeing that happen in Mariupol, but there's smaller towns like this one in Volnovakha that the Russians control, but in reality are just gone. So that's their plan for the country.
When they start to encircle Kiev, are they? Do you think they're planning for an assault, or do you think that they're planning to essentially try and just strangle the city by way of starvation? By way of my understanding is that there was they're attacking water supplies. I mean, is this based upon their effectiveness in fighting the Ukrainians at this point? It seems like their next option is just to sort of wait. If they can get, supplies for their own military, they just wait.
Yeah. So I think what they're doing right now, there actually haven't been significant Russian advances in the past few days. They pulled back some of their units that were near Kyiv. I'm not like super huge on the grander like military analysis and tactics. What I've generally seen is that they think that the Russian forces there, having been stymied in this like sort of swift assault on the city, are kind of regrouping, and then they're planning that next move. I think the best predictions that I have seen is that it is going to be some form of like kind of protracted siege of the city. But I honestly, it's been so hard to predict what they're going to do. But from everyone I've spoken to and everything I've read, it looks like, this is sort of a brief respite as they're regrouping, and then it's going to get a whole lot worse for Kyiv. They're going to, continue shelling and bombarding and bombing and kind of throwing as much as they can out at it. I guess the question for me basically is what the resources of the Russian military actually are and how long they can keep this up. They're already asking China for supplies. They're already conscripting people in Russia. They're already having, it does not seem particularly well organized. And while there's a lot of like power there, I don't know how long they can do that for, but it seems like they're going to do it as long as they can.
Lastly, Chernobyl. What is your sense as to what is going on with Chernobyl? I don't sort of understand what the idea is with that.
So I think, I don't want to speak too soon. I think Chernobyl is kind of like sort of like red herring. Like the nuclear stuff is not as big of an issue there. Like
my understanding is it's not as dangerous as
as Zaporizhzhia. No,
I think at this point because it has been 40 years.
It's been dormant for ages. There's like a massive like metal enclosure over the reactor itself. Like there were some issues where they were like the fighting there has like kicked up like radioactive dust and like the power was out at the facility or something like that. Obviously, if they drastically mismanage it or someone like starts dropping bombs on the old like Chernobyl power plant, itself, like that's bad. That could be an issue. I think Chernobyl's significance more so is just a like conventional strategic one. It's a big sort of area of built up with roads and stuff through Pripyat and stuff like that. That is, it's right on the border with Belarus, directly north of Kyiv. So it's just an area that the Belarusians and Russians want to control so that they can control, as I've said, like these main arterial roads and these highways that let them project force and get like armor and tanks and stuff immediately down to the outskirts of Kyiv. So I'm if we're worried about like nuclear risks in the country, I'm much more worried about the power plant down on the Dnieper River. I think it's a little bit southwest of Zaporizhzhia than I am of the old dormant stuff in Chernobyl.
All right, let me add one more question, and this is, I guess, sort of a big one, and I apologize, but for pretending the last question was the last one. There's two dynamics here, right? One is that the question of, is there an off ramp for Putin that is, I mean, he's sort of on the highway already, but is there an off ramp where, that this endeavor where he can go and so this was always about just getting independence for these these regions in Donbass and and to the extent that there isn't and it really becomes a quagmire for Putin, right? I mean, because we've already talked about like there is going to be there essentially controlling Ukraine is not going to be something that seems like it's going to be viable for any time in the future. That I wonder how much of an impetus there is at one point when there is a realization that this conflict cannot be avoided. And we've talked about, the idea of arming people because they're not going to stop in terms of killing, and that the Russians. How much of that is like, were there war hawks in your mind in this country, in NATO, broadly speaking, who said, this is an opportunity, one that we didn't necessarily court, but we didn't think would arise, but this is an opportunity to, in many respects, this is how the Soviet Union ended with Afghanistan. This is an opportunity to end, maybe to do a Russian reset type of thing. How much of that do you think is out there?
I mean, I think there's definitely people there's probably definitely some horrible people out there that were hoping for that situation beginning. And unfortunately for everyone in Russia and everyone in Ukraine, I think that's already happened. I think the Russian state as we know it is finished. I don't think that there is, I don't really see an off-ramp for Putin. I guess he could say like our limited military operation, because that's how they've been phrasing it, has concluded. We've secured independence and freedom for the Russian-speaking peoples of the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. we're pulling back from Kiev after sending a strong message to the Nazi government in charge of Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. These are the new borders of Donetsk and Luhansk. Will abide to a ceasefire based on those. Maybe. I hope that happens. But I honestly don't. I don't know. It wasn't a logical or rational decision that caused them to invade in the first place, right? And I think the consequences that have been leveled against Russia have been disastrous, both militarily and economically. I think there's a lot to critique, as well as to the West's use of broad sanctions that are going to harm the Russian economy in general and the Russian people, as opposed to much more targeted and focused sanction. You know, we didn't sanction Putin himself immediately because, like, world leaders are, you know, technically a hands-off zone or something like that. Yeah. And we're only now getting around to like sanctioning a whole bunch of the oligarchs and stuff
after
like that.
After they've had the opportunity to store, you know, whatever it is, convert all of their holdings into diamonds and put it into some, you know, safe somewhere or something, whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so you know, I think
that,
I think there's a lot to critique about the U.S. response to that, but I think the response, as it has been from the U.S. and the Western and the European community, has just absolutely thrashed the concept and notion of Russia and Russia as a state. And I don't, especially if this war drags on for years and things like that, and they keep sinking resources that they don't have into this, like, yeah, it's going to break them. And I'm sure that there are war hawks in Washington that are pleased about that. You know, personally, I absolutely don't think it would be a bad thing if Putin's regime came down. But I wish that there were a way that could happen that would have less fallout on, you know, Russian people.
Human suffering.
Exactly. But I honestly, I don't know. I don't see an off-ramp to that. And I especially don't see an off-ramp to this conflict that doesn't end up with a huge amount more suffering being leveled on the primary people that are experiencing it, which is the Ukrainians. You know, it is bad for Russians that, you know, but like having your bank accounts all messed up and McDonald's closed down is not the same thing as, you know, cluster bombs in your living room. That's not to excuse the US's actions in certain ways or say that like sanctions are good, but there's always levels to the pain that people experience in situations like this.
Jack Crosbie, thank you so much. Very happy, obviously, that you made it back safely. Really impressive work while you were over there. You know, there's a piece we didn't even get to it, but I would encourage people to go check out the piece that you wrote on the Discourse blog. Was it today or yesterday? I don't know, about NATO's ability,
Friday, I think.
Yeah, to absorb immigrants. Or refugees, I should really say, that if we want to help mitigate the human suffering in some way, that's the place to do it. We'll put a link to that, obviously. And nice to have you back on the AM Quickie. There you go. Right.
Yeah.
Slide right back in. All right, man. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
All right, folks. That was on Friday. Go back and read some of Jack's stuff. And obviously, I would imagine he's going to be writing about Ukraine for some time. Well, sort of broke format a little bit today. We got enough. It was a 45-minute fun half. The show was originally, when we launched this show, it was supposed to be a 45-minute fun half and a 45-minute free half.
Mila only promises 50 minutes on the teaser to the public.
Oh, 50 minutes?
50 minutes.
All right. Well, Mila, they gave away an extra 5 minutes. It wasn't hers to give away. That was like the nascent, and she must have recorded that like 10 years ago. I think we recorded that like 8 years ago, 10 years ago.
It's before my time.
Before your time. It was like the nascent beginnings of her.
She's probably younger than Saul or about
her
Saul's
Depop. Oh yeah, she was younger than Saul. Yeah, that has been the weird thing. Is Saul just had his birthday, and he is now older than Mila was when Saul was born. but I am realizing, and I sort of knew at the time, almost two only childs. Because I get news for you. When if you're not aware of what happens when some girls turn 16, but like she's gone. She has more interaction with like the fridge, or
it's a good age for the fridge,
or even the dishwasher, which she barely has any interaction with, than she does with me. I am just like, I think there are times when she's actually surprised that I'm actually talking. Anyways, 646-257-3920. We may get a couple of phone calls in. We'll take your IMs. We'll do a couple of clips. It's called The Fun Half, ladies and gentlemen. Also, Majority Live. We've got our live show now. It's less than 2 weeks away.
Oh, wow.
Yep. I think Jack's going to be there. I think. And the whole extended Majority Report family, at least the ones that live in Brooklyn, will be there. We may have some other special guests and some submissions from some of our, longtime callers and IMers. And of course, that's the thing I think is going to be really fun. This is like, I originally thought this was going to happen in Boston January 16th. And then now here's the other thing. Nobody cares the way I experience it. Right? I mean, it's the audience cares about how they experience it, but I don't have that. I don't have that ability. This is really about how I experience it. So this is about like me seeing a bunch of you. Like I got a little bit of that the other night at the Bituation Room. Like, I saw like Train Boy, a couple other listeners of the program who immediately they say their name. And all I do is see their IM handle.
Yeah. It's a interesting thing to try to recalibrate when a person is introducing themselves and it's like a username that you've seen.
All
many
I
times.
see is like the bubble on the screen. But this is going to be a way of like us celebrating that we can all be together, and so Majority Live. But my point was, you can stream it if you're not going to be there. And you can go to Majority Live, click through on the Brooklyn show. You can stream it. You'll get a streaming thing. It'll be available after you've streamed it to be able to watch it for you if you purchased a streaming ticket. And here's the deal. The streaming tickets are like very reasonably priced at like $12.50. However, this is like a Crazy Eddie commercial. I just went insane one night. And was like, let's put in a coupon code for more than 50% off. $7.50, 50 cents off the streaming. So $5. But you can only get that coupon code if you go to amquickie.com, sign up for the AM Quickie. And then bonus, actually, this is really the prize. Corey and Jack, who you just heard from, produce an amazing newsletter every morning that is emailed to you. And you get some of the top stories of the day. So check it out, amquickie.com. Don't forget, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY, get 10% off. And freshly back from his European vacation, Matt Leck has a new a travel podcast out.
So I should do. I am going to be flying solo because David Griscom and I are staggering our vacation. So I will be doing Left Reckoning this week, Friday. We'll be having Carl Baer on to talk Ukraine and Russia. And I actually haven't caught up with what David did last week. I know he had Natalie Shore on and Ben Burgess. I will be probably listening to that before I prepare the next week's show. But I'll be going into A.C. Townley, who was he was a socialist, but then he decided to leave socialism behind in North Dakota because it wasn't quite taking. So he started a farm populist party by driving around in a Model T. And we'll be going into how that sort of movement created the state grain elevator and the state bank that, by the way, paid for my travels in undergrad. and how he was thrown in prison for opposing World War I, and then became an anti-communist kind of crank. But anyway, that will be on Wednesday at Left Reckoning, so check that out, folks.
See you in the fun half. 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now, and I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now, and I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now, but I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second. Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
No me key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false. No, I'm sorry. Women's.
Stop talking for a second. Now let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, this is me. This me?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports.
We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm going to go start watching.
Libertarians. They're so stupid, though. Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
I'm positively quivering. I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-35-501. 1/2. 3/8.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
6, 5, 4, $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
Call it satire. Sam goes, it's satire.
On top of it all,
Yeah.
my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the week being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a gulag?
Outrageous.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye-bye. Text me. I am me. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we're back. It is the fun half. I am now going to call in because I was remiss in not doing it before. And that is the sound that says that we're ready. And here we go. It is the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. You know what that means? Oh, do you hear that?
Oh, is it my little sound back?
No, there's a little bit of a little buzz. We will get rid of that. I don't know if you folks are hearing it. Yeah, then it just went away.
Little static on the phone line.
Okay, we will work on that. Talia from Tampa. Hey, I'm our crew. Guess who gets to re-sign their lease in a couple months? And guess whose rent has gone up by just about 20%? Jeez, Tampa Bay was one of the worst markets for rent hikes over the past year, with median increase at around 26%. Economy working as intended. Bobby D, major audio. Oh, okay. Yeah, we fixed that. All right. Left-handed stranger. Can we get a Kowalski to recommend me a book about climate change regarding framing and shit? I just finished This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein. Good read. And I'm curious about how effed we are with food. Also, Why not just have Kowalski on as a first half guest? We should do that. Fix your mic.
We have
fix your
done
mic.
a.
You have no idea how bad your mic sounds in the first 4 minutes. Didn't think Sam would ever become a libertarian, but this audio proves it's happened. Wow, this audio is progressively worse than last week, says Eddie Munster. Sam, you're clipping a little better, a little better. It's a little better, still a little clippy, a little better, a little clippy. Welcome back, Matt, at 12:07. Sam sounds good to me now. Sam, thanks for clarifying the asexuality point as someone on the asexual spectrum. I appreciate it. FYI, the opposite of asexual is allosexual. Train boy, the gain is too high for both of you. And luck. And the clips, slightly better, but Sam is still distorting. Much better. Appreciate the shout out. Also, asexuals are legally protected under New York hate crime laws. Oh, good. Valley girl. Matt, how was Spain?
That's a big question, but it was, Madrid was incredible. I didn't get to go to Barcelona because weather didn't quite permit, so we went to Valencia instead. But taking a train across Spain is an amazing experience, and I wish our train system was as high speed as that, because they're like unbelievable. It wasn't even that expensive. It was like 60 euros. And in an hour and a half, I was on the coast in Valencia looking at the Mediterranean. And also Madrid is an amazing town. Very affordable too, which was nice.
How is it that, I would imagine, maybe it's not. I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe I'm talking out of my arse here. But aren't these countries more dense? Largely speaking, I guess maybe not in the Northeast corridor, but aren't they more dense?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit to that. Spain's an interesting case because it's got so many, like Madrid is such a...
No, but I guess my point is, like, how can they put in high-speed rail and we can't?
Because fossil fuel and automobile interests.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry. Really, the answer when people say, like, how was your trip to Spain? You just go, like, it was cool.
It was awesome. I really liked it. I like being outside of America. Not to sound like an anti-patriot, but it's there's certain things that, I don't know, it just seems like people are a little bit more cared for than they're by the governments there.
Kid tested Politburo. We need Alex Jones' alpha male vitality ad read from Sam with that opening audio. I wonder if, how bad is it? We may have to, can we fix it for the...
Can maybe adjust it a little bit, yeah.
Dirty Hard. Hey, y'all, won't be able to make the Brooklyn show. Is there a way to donate my ticket, or should I just get a refund and donate it to the show for others who are unable to subscribe? You can do either. We could, I'm sure we'll be able to resell it. But you could also go into the, into our Discord, thatmajoritydiscord.com. And I am sure we have people in there who would love to go. And that seems to be, if you want to find somebody who really wants to go and either couldn't get a ticket for whatever reason, couldn't afford a ticket for whatever reason, Majority Discord would be the best place, because that's where you'll get, the people who are most inclined to be a part of the conversation. So, but thank you. Teacher Dan, when I found out my daughter was going to be home from college to prepare for a road trip with a couple of friends, I started to curse a little at the dog as I stood out of ease my bones into the chair. I was only warming up for the conversations I have with my girls. Does that make me a precursor? Okay. Boston Bernie Bro. As of today, Cambridge, Mass. has ended the mask mandate. 92% of residents have received at least one dose of COVID-19 vaccine. 76% are fully vaccinated. 45% have received a booster dose. It's always amazing to me how low the booster dose is. The booster numbers are. It's always snowy in Ottawa. The audio is more blown out than Bradley's back from carrying the show last week. Sam, your caller says a no-nonsense Monday, but your plunging neckline suggests you're floating a trial balloon as to whether open and OnlyFans. I recommend using Patreon because you can have different member tiers, and we know how much you get off on tranches. That is well done. Things are a little slow in Ottawa, I guess, these days. Coming up with this is some of your best comments, I think. Black Magvik, I'm glad Sam struggled on his own last week just as much as Emma. Maryland Mailman, What's the deal with white Americans and Hitler? Michael from Bavaria. Michael McFall is like a reverse Candace Owens, who claimed that Hitler should have been okay if he would have been okay if he only slaughtered Germans. Cattletown Napper. McFall engaged in effectively Holocaust denial. His comments on top of being racist, Jews can't be German, he ignores huge swaths of people killed in it. His comments denied their existence, and his apology double downs on the racism. I wonder if he thinks of whites as ethnic Americans.
Yeah, there's no ethnic Germans that are disabled or socialists, those sorts of folks.
It's just so weird. Like, was he trying to say, like, Hitler never bombed a large concentration of Aryans?
Also, like, you know, I've just in Spain, Franco bombed a bunch of Spanish cities. Does that mean Franco is definitely worse than Hitler? Like, I don't know what it's such a weird talking point.
It's just like, dude, come on. Come on.
And, you know, the message he wants to send is this is worse than Hitler. Let's do more, basically, right?
Yes, that's the bottom line is like, how can I? Yes. Chris from Taiwan. We should all stop comparing people and things to Hitler and Nazi Germany entirely. I actually think it can be a useful point of reference, but maybe we need a complete and total shutdown of Hitler comparisons until everyone knows what the hell is going on. Man Shovel. Michael McFall has been involved in a project spreading Russophobia and ginning up conflict with Russia for years. Anything this guy says is worth ridicule. Q for short. I used to think the birds aren't real conspiracy was funny, but now I have no idea how to feel about it. Though I laughed 2 or 3 times during the interview, I found it mostly uncomfortable and sad. Do you think satire has a place in political discourse anymore? Or are we at a place where satire just contributes to the misinformation overload that helps the right? I definitely get the idea that, like, we're so close to people believing that birds aren't real that what may have been satire when this started 5 or 6 years ago now sort of feels like, like a trailing, like a lagging indicator.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember, frankly, 20 years ago having these conversations. I remember, like, you know, Mort Saul saying this when he came out to our show in 2004, like, you know, can't compete anymore. Satire cannot keep pace with this. I think that, look,
I think satire is useful in media literacy, though, and, like, I think certain people get lessons from it. I think generally people get a better lesson from it than, you know, accidentally believing that the satire is real.
I mean, look, there were huge swaths of conservatives who for a long time thought Stephen Colbert was on their side. Now, I suppose, I don't know how you can assess this, frankly. I really don't. I guess my sense is this, ultimately, and I'm pulling this out of my ass, but I do tend to believe this, that the cost associated with, you know, sort of like maybe not helping those who, the idea of contributing to the misinformation overload, I think the value of satire is for those forces who are going to fight misinformation or fight the power that be. And that is more important than the potential collateral damage insofar as maybe there's a couple more ignorant people who believe in the misinformation. Because look, there's 3 types of people who saw that interview. One who knew that it was fake from the beginning, and it gives them basically a lesson in how this happens and how people believe it. 2, people who believe that it was real, and there was a lot of you, frankly, who did believe it was real. And I don't blame you, but at one point you're going to realize it wasn't real, and it's also going to give you tremendous insights into how is it that, like, half the country believes that, JFK Jr. is going to be Donald Trump's running mate. Well, now you know. Now you know. And then there's going to be a segment of people who stumble on it on YouTube who are going to be like, holy shit, I can't believe the U.S. government did this.
Yeah, and I think part of the weird thing about it now is the visibility of these beliefs. Like, think of how big of a problem cults were in like the 70s and stuff like that, but that didn't filter up through like social media algorithms and get to everyone.
No.
Like, I think it is a different sort of environment, but I don't know if it's entirely new.
It's not entirely new, but we have a new technology that I think, again, we have yet to catch up to as a society, right? I mean, this happens almost all the time with technology, it seems to me. And sometimes I don't think society ever catches up.
Still catching up to Gutenberg.
But we can't, I mean, certainly I, as a non-digital native, as it were, you know, it can't get an assessment of when, like, you know, Mila's generation and Saul's generation, you know, she's growing up with, you know, there's going to be a lot of problems associated with it, but there's also going to be ability to deal with certain aspects of this. Like, her ability to filter out information is theoretically going to be stronger than mine. Theoretically. I don't know. It's a shit show, folks. Who are we kidding? All right, let's get to it. Speaking of shit show, Bill Maher went on to the Ben Shapiro show. I tell you, Bill Maher has always been a bit of a libertarian. And he, you know, his show was politically incorrect, and he was sort of, that was the show that really launched him. And it really was about being like, you know, the old white guy id in responding to a new generation of emancipation that was taking place in the 90s. Politically correct was the term started as a way for college students, I think in like the 90s, to assess whether they wanted to date somebody. It was a jokey term. It was a jokey term. And then it was adopted by the right more than it was by the left.
I imagine that drove them pretty crazy to talk about being disqualified from dating.
Right. This was, the 90s were very, like, it was a different time. And it was like when we had come out of the Reagan era, homophobia was beginning to become less acceptable. And I phrase it that way specifically. I don't know how much people appreciate, like, how bad it was in the 80s and the 90s. Because, like, you know, in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 50s, people pretended like it didn't exist. And the homophobia was just like, so it was almost like so baked into society that there was no name for homophobia, I think, probably at that time. But then in the 80s, it became like this thing that walked around. And in the early 90s, it was walking around. It was like a thing to do. And you know, for a guy like Bill Maher, I was like, what are the kids doing? He wasn't that old, but he knew where he was headed. And, you know, after 9/11, he was still like, you know, I'm going to play the contrarian, and it got him into trouble. And so he became a little bit of a hero of the anti-Bush people. And there's some points over the years where he has been, you know, I think like a reliable liberal on some issues. But, you know, dude's wants to get re-upped on that show, wants to be in the limelight. Here he is on the Ben Shapiro show.
But when you say woke, you know, it's become, and I make fun of it too, because it's become an eye roll in many ways. If woke, I assume at a certain moment, and it wasn't that long ago before we didn't have the term. I only heard it, I don't know what it was, 3-4 years ago. 5 years ago at most when we heard the term woke, and it was like alert to injustice. I'm like, okay, I'm down with that. I always have been. I hope people still understand that about me. But yes, it became sort of a byword for a lot of this goofy stuff. That's what I'm always railing against. That's why, like, they play me on Fox News now.
Yeah, I mean, how do you feel about that? Because you went from the guy who was.
I feel. Look, I haven't changed at all. My politics hasn't changed. They've changed. People say to me sometimes, have you changed? No. It's that 5 years ago, no one was talking about defunding the police. I never heard that phrase 5 years ago. That's not me changing. That's things changing. I'm reacting to it, as I've always been. Letting 3-year-olds decide what gender they are. This wasn't something 5 years ago.
Pause it for a second. First off, keep fighting for that injustice by protecting the police, which I think there is no possible metric in the world, no possible metric that exists that can tell you that the policing in this country has brought about justice. There's no metric. If you're talking about justice in terms of social justice, in terms of like, are there specific people who are subjected to different treatment from police? There is no possible metric. It's a big drug legalization guy. He doesn't have to go far in his canon to find this information. And if you're going to you don't like the slogan, fine. But to pretend like I don't understand what this means or what it's about, and this is brand new and this and that, I don't know. I think there's been people who have problem with the police.
Yeah, I think I remember a phrase called "fuck the police" from the 1990s.
I remember a phrase like, "Hey, pigs," that type of thing. Like, that's not a new term. I don't think that was a term of endearment.
All of a sudden, people started disrespecting police.
Yeah, that's very strange. And then this idea of like, hey, 5 years ago, the idea of letting kids choose their gender was not a thing. Do you know what else wasn't happening 10 years ago or 12 years ago? That was the right of gay people to marry. In fact, 15 years ago, you'll recall Bill Maher, or maybe it was like 16 or 17 years ago, the president of the country wanted to amend the Constitution to prevent people from marrying people of the same sex. I mean, there was a time where there was never, ever, ever, ever a black woman who sat on the Supreme Court. Oh, wait, that time is now. And hopefully in 6 months, that won't be the case. I mean, this idea that they changed. Who's the they? Like, what is the they that's going on here? Wokeism is no different than politically correct. You had a show that was called Politically Incorrect. You've always been an ass. Now, and to some extent, he's accurate about that. But it's like the idea that like we're progressing to the point where we're getting more enlightened about things.
Yeah, this reminds me of like one of the negative experiences I remember from my childhood, which is the first time I ever came across a trans person in real life, and that was sort of understood that was going on. So me and some kids in like 5th grade traveled to DC for a history sort of festival type of thing, and we were on public transportation. There's a trans woman there, and people were pointing and laughing and snickering, and it was awful because none of us had any sort of like context for that. And I wish society had been where it is now, where we have these sort of conversations where it is a little bit more understanding, because none of us were prepared to be anything but frankly cruel at that age. And like, this is all a massive step forward, and I feel so sorry for that person. And like that, it stays with me to this day. So like that there's this backlash against alertness to injustices against, say, trans people is just really disgusting. I don't understand how people can maintain that publicly.
And the idea that like you're not going to let a 3-year-old express themselves that they want to is absurd. I don't think that you should be giving medical treatment to 3-year-olds, and no one is. But the idea that you can't let a 3-year-old identify, and because look, I mean, I know of instances where 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds have said to their parents, like, I want to be a girl, I want to be a boy. And then a couple years later, They didn't. And a couple of years later, they continued. I mean, like, where's the harm in this?
I think there is demonstrated harm of forcing people into these specific 2 slots, blue and pink, that we need to force, that these people want to continue forcing people into.
This dude, honestly, was like, they were making parodies of this guy 50 years ago. In like, just listen to the song of All in the Family, right? Boys were boys and men and girls were girls, or whatever it is. Continue.
Decide what gender they are. This wasn't something 5 years ago. Free speech, used to be a left-wing thing that we were proud and owned, and now that seems to be under attack. So again, I think I've.
Is there any more to this? I play the next clip too. Unbelievable, this dude. Free speech. I can't even do any of some of my best material anymore.
On the climate change thing, if the proposals were for seawalls from the Republican Party and not this snowball means there's no global warming, then you'd be then you'd be in the ballpark.
Yeah, I also think we could lead more. I'm maybe I'm wrong, but I do think if we took the lead, if we planted our flag on the ground and said we're doing this, I think you can get people. I think you can shame people a little bit. Now I understand it's very hard to. Can you still use the term third world, or is that bad?
I do. I mean,
oh, that's right.
Are we talking about
okay, well, it's bad.
Developing world. Which nation are we talking about here? Are we talking about nations that where people are burning dung for fuel? Because, I mean, by the way, we should mention that when it comes to green energy, it's very easy for first world people to care a lot about solar panels. But when you're burning dung for fuel in Africa, that makes it very, very difficult for you to care.
But what I'm saying is third world. Okay, places that have not had air conditioning, places that have not had cars. Okay, and now they finally are getting them.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to say to them, look, we've been enjoying these things for quite a long time now.
You stop that right now.
No, bad timing.
Yeah.
Bad timing for you. You have to forego these things. So I take your point. It's going to be very hard for India and China, but I mean, they're not stupid. I mean, they must understand that what good is it to win the economic race if you can't breathe? I mean, the air in Beijing, don't they sometimes have to take drastic measures because you can't breathe there?
Well, the nice thing about being a communist dictatorship is that a few more people die, what's a few more beans more or less is the nice thing about being a.
What the hell are these guys talking about? They're just completely gone off the rails.
They're trying to agree, even though Bill Maher supposedly has a different position on climate change.
This is what's so gross about this interview. Okay. This is so much of Bill Maher basically saying my audience has just completely dropped out. And that's fine. Look, we go through ebbs and flows with our audience on this program. That happens. But he is so desperately trying to cater to a different audience that he is sitting across from someone who represents fundamentally, if there is one thing that has been Bill Maher's bailiwick over the 15, 25 years that he has been in a political social commentator. If there is one thing that has defined his career, it is his complete and utter disdain for religion. And he's literally sitting across from as close as you can get to a Jewish theocrat in this country, about this country, and who has continually judged people as being bad Jews or not bad Jews, continually judged people as to whether they are reaching the bar of the Christian Judeo ethic. A man I call the Pope of the Jews, Ben Shapiro. And yet, let's see if we can find some common ground by, sort of like China, third world, India, third world, which incidentally not, that you're telling people who haven't had cars that they can't develop which is exactly not what we're doing. In fact, the idea is that if you notice that imbalance, then maybe what we should do is be the first to do this. Why don't you make that argument? There's the pussyfooting around here in that moment, again, is indicative of like this whole attempt. Like, I'm going to speak to the other side. Now, what I say to them is really going to be more about them, you know, getting some of these people and they're going to be changing me as much as I hope to change them. That's what's going on here.
Yeah, but like the Ben Shapiro starts that question off because Ben Shapiro is basically a climate denier. He's famously the guy who says just sell your house. The idea that you could just build a seawall, well, we know that doesn't work for Florida because the water is just going to go right underneath it.
It's built on lime. It's a sponge.
And you know that's the thing is Bill Maher should know all of this, and he seems to like nod to it, like he says we should lead, right? But what does that mean? Is that some sort of like climate reparation or something like that? Because we have put all this CO2 in the atmosphere throughout this entire history, and now countries at other like it never connects what his actual point is because he's just too busy looking for agreement and bigotry, right? Like
it's all platitudes.
Yeah, China and people who burn dung, and let's just be racist together.
It's honestly like these are my bona fides for being not a conservative, which is going to give you more value to all of my conservative views. It's just, you know, he's on the Dave Rubin, he's getting Rubinicized. Oh. Speaking of Dave Rubin, one of the benefits that you get by being part of the Glenn Beck network is that you become someone. You fill the slot of like we're going to sell the potential crossover Republicans, and who's going to interview the non-white woman? Well, let's give it to Dave because his audience is already pretty loosey-goosey with what they'll accept on the Glenn Beck network. I don't know if that's the way that they do that over there. I mean, I'm just looking back to Dave's time when he was sponsored by the Liberty Universe. What was it? What was it? It was some Koch brother, intermediary that was feeding him guests from some a libertarian college, essentially.
Hillsdale, was that it?
No, it wasn't Hillsdale. I can't remember exactly what it was. People could look it up, but it's all there. But here is Dave Rubin. And what number is this here?
Oh, this is a late edition, so not on the sheet. But this is Nikki Haley feeding Dave Rubin sort of like what the conservative war hawk establishment view of the Ukraine-Russia situation is.
Is this one of the things that we discussed in our original interview, say 6 or 8 months ago, where if the United States does not lead, does not say, hey, we have red lines that you can't cross, say there are things that you cannot do. If we don't do it, that the world just kind of goes to hell in the handbasket. It doesn't mean we do everything right all the time, but pretty much without us, NATO doesn't function. Other countries don't sort of stand up for what's right.
Pause it for 1 second. Listen, I just want to be clear here because, there's going to be young people who watch this, who are going to be thinking that they're watching something of substance. And understand, when you say the world going to hell in a handbasket, it is really, really important to be specific on what you're talking about, because I don't know what that means. Because in my mind, hell in a handbasket is World War III. In my mind, hell in a handbasket is
a nuclear
exchange. And right now, the United States is clearly leading. And if you want not hell in a handbasket, in other words, as less human suffering and destruction as possible, you need to be very explicit as to what your agenda is. He says hell in a handbasket. It literally could mean anything. In fact, I would argue that he's more interested in what would lead to World War III than would not. And so this implication that the U.S. is not leading is absurd. You could argue like, no, we should get into a nuclear confrontation with Russia. Now, I would think you would be a sociopath to make that argument, but it's not like they don't exist. Continue.
Pretty much without us, NATO doesn't function, other countries don't sort of stand up for what's right?
Yeah, I think it was very clear to me at the United Nations that whether countries like the U.S. or not, they want us to lead. They would much rather follow the United States than follow China or Russia any day of the week. And, you know, what I saw is when we speak, the world listens. When we act, the world follows. Who we are, the world wants to be. And so it doesn't mean we have to go to war, but it means that we need to speak and speak loudly. And we need to make sure we do it in the name of freedom and we do it in the name of peace. And what we need to be saying loudly now is, you know, Europeans thought that if they were nice to Russia, that Russia would leave them alone. And what you find out is when you sleep with the devil owns you. Europeans became 40% dependent on Russian oil. Russia is a one industry country. Their whole livelihood is surrounded by energy and the energy industry. And so what Europe has to do now is they have to become independent of Russian oil. Poland and Lithuania have already done that. They're getting theirs from Australia. The United States should not be taking Russian oil. We could open up the Keystone Pipeline and that would take up the oil that we're getting from them. But also we need to double down on fracking. We need to export liquefied natural gas. We need to really start to understand this is a national security issue. Because while a lot of people think this is just Ukraine, 1 million people have migrated out of Ukraine into all of those European countries, especially Poland right now. The entire European region is going to be disrupted. And we're all going to feel that. And so this is about being smart and realizing where we are and the fact that we need to be doing something. If you see the death that's happening in the
maybe just address the fracking point.
Well, wait. Let's get. I want to do that second, actually. Wait, just let it go just a little bit more. No, I've been waiting. I'm biting my tongue here.
This is about being smart and realizing where we are and the fact that we need to be doing something. If you see the death that's happening in the streets of Ukraine, don't think that's over there. That very well could be us. That's not saying, you know, anytime there is a free democracy, there's a tyrant ready to take it. We've seen that with Israel for a long time. You're now seeing that with Ukraine. You're going to see it with Taiwan. The United States has to figure out what they want to be when they lead. And I think we are always right when we lead on the side of freedom.
So you briefly mentioned sanctions.
Pause. Okay, this is just insanity. I mean, I don't even know what the hell this means. Some of it, but we're going to get to we need to double down on fracking. We'll get to that in a second. But let me tell you what was not mentioned there in terms of leading. In the talk of the million refugees, really, I think it's closer to 2 million now, external refugees and millions internal refugees. The word that did not come out of her mouth was help. Help those refugees. We could be pouring money in. Jack Crosbie's piece in the Discourse on Friday was very explicit on what we could be doing. We could be pouring in funds. We could be pouring in aid. We could be taking a lot of Ukrainian refugees. We could be helping situate them in these countries. There's so much we could be doing. And we, in this instance, is the U.S. government. Then she says, we need to double down on fracking and we need to open up the Keystone XL pipeline. Let's be clear. The Keystone XL pipeline is a pipeline. The pipeline does not extract the oil, and it's really, really heavy. The oil needing of most refining. In fact, it needs to be heated through the whole pipe system to get down there.
And it goes to places like North Dakota and Canada.
But if we wanted to, if this was about energy independence, that pipe would not go all the way down to our southern coast. It goes down to our southern coast because that's where it's going to be shipped out. That's not energy independence. That's we're a hyperloop for the energy. But talk about the fracking part, and then I'll talk about the we part.
Well, you see, even conservatives are understanding now that like the fracking stuff is because particularly like Wall Street doesn't want to invest in that anymore, which is okay. If we're just taking like, oh, we need the government to basically start fracking. Let's just have the military open up a fracking core and start like drilling new wells. Like why at this point we should be doing what we should have been doing for the last like 20, 30 years, which is moving off of fossil fuels.
We should be doing that, but I want to get back to that we part. Because the reason why there is no fracking going on, the reason why there is no more drilling on all these permits that they're sitting on is because they don't want to expend the capital for fear that in 6 months, the price of oil is going to drop in such a way that they're going to lose their shirts. If we think it is a national security issue, then because the we doesn't include me, it doesn't even include her, although she probably sits on the board of some oil company with my guess. But the we does not include the we. It is the financiers for these companies. If we really want to make it we can. We should nationalize all of it.
Yep.
We nationalize the rigs, we nationalize the refineries, we nationalize the pipes, the trains, we nationalize all of our energy production. And then we can genuinely be energy independent because we would decide through our government not to put it on the international market. We would use only what we need to consume. We don't have to sell it for profit. We will supply this, and then we will ratchet down our use of this and supplant it with sustainable energy. And if that is what we are suggesting, I want to say that I think we should all be on board. We. Unbelievable.
And she's pretty cavalier later in that interview about the prospects of World War III, and just says we just can't be afraid of we can't stuff like that.
We can't be afraid of World War III. Why would we? Unbelievable. All right. Let's do this Jordan Peterson thing, and then we'll do a couple IMs we get out here. Fortunately, I never took any phone calls, so I don't feel bad. I haven't kept people on the line for half an hour and this and that. So you've heard this thing about ivermectin. I know. Like, seriously, are we still talking about this? It's really important for a group of people out there to start with the top one. See if you can frame out the bottom one. It's really important for a group of people out there to continue to push this notion of ivermectin having been a solution to COVID, because they want to push this narrative of how we're the truth tellers, and also we have been subjected to an unprecedented censorship campaign. Right? I mean, like, we're down to 44,000 cases or so a day on average, still hovering around 1,000 people dying. That is a lagging indicator. We were up around 800,000 infections on a daily basis just a couple of months ago, not even. So this ivermectin thing, and we're seeing more and more antivirals out there, this ivermectin thing is all about trying to prove a point that they were right, that the ivermectin crew were right. Who is still on this beat? Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. And here he is on March 7th. This should be a bombshell. Remember, he's a doctor. He's an academic.
Dr. Jordan B. Peterson.
He is a doctor. He's an academic. It's about truth and integrity. This should be a bombshell. Treatment with ivermectin is associated with decreased mortality in COVID compared to remdesivir. And it is a study in ScienceDirect.com, or it's a paper, I should say. Treatment with ivermectin is associated with to evaluate the difference in mortality. Patients treated with ivermectin, you can't read the whole thing. And it gets at least 17,000, maybe more. I don't think he's deleted. Has he deleted? I don't believe it is. And so he puts that up March 7th. Scroll down. And the next day, Yakov Efemenko, March 8th. Hi, Dr. Peterson, first author of the paper. That's referring to him. I think the information and data is being crudely misrepresented and misinterpreted. This is an abstract, in parentheses, not peer reviewed, from a conference I presented at. We did not submit the manuscript for a reason. Weak evidence. And he had one retweet and one like. No, the numbers may have changed.
Yeah, I have an update on the numbers. Now we're up to 72 retweets. So, you know, not triple figures yet compared to the thousands that Peterson got, 6,000 that Peterson got, and 800 likes. There's a little bit more. I'll put it up here. And Efemenko now says, so people are saying, can we please ratio JP on this? And Efemenko says, doesn't seem to be interested in having the conversation, but the reality is such that if they're willing to put these brittle bricks of evidence, such as my abstract, into the house they are building, tells you a lot about the strength of their evidence. Right. Now, he writes this a day later. Peterson never responds to it. And of course, there are a bunch of people. I mean, there's no way that Peterson doesn't know about this. And then play a clip of this video. It explains just how impressive it is, that this student who wrote the paper, this PhD student who wrote the paper, was in pulling it because they realized it was not good. This video gives you a little bit. Now, how many views has this video gotten? Only less than about 3,000 views. Okay. So nowhere close to the misinformation. And we should say it's not just Peterson, right? There are others who are pushing this. That other guy, the nurse, the British nurse, also hopped on this thing, and he gets, I don't know, 1 million views. Yeah, Campbell, crank.
Here's this guy is putting it out. What's his name? Professor Greg on YouTube. You should check him out. And here is a video attempting to contextualize the data. But basically, all you need to know is the front part where the actual author of the study pulled it months and months ago. Go ahead.
Welcome. Once in a while, we get an opportunity to see the process of scientific misinformation happen in real time. We're getting that opportunity now, and it's because of the misrepresentation of this conference abstract that I discussed with the first author yesterday. It'll be linked up here. As I reflect on this, I'm really, really impressed with Yakov Efemenko, the first author. Consider his position. He's a medical student. He's been doing research in urology. He was brought into a project. Let me show that project. He was involved in this project, which was published last year in the Journal of the American Medical Association. He's acknowledged in this project. He had been doing other research, and then on that basis, he went forward and started looking at a database that has lots of information, as he discussed, and he started looking at COVID and different treatments, and he ended up doing a piece of work on comparing, in this retrospective cohort study, comparing ivermectin and another treatment, remdesivir. Now, these are very different treatments. Remdesivir is an intravenous antiviral. Ivermectin is taken orally. So that means remdesivir is always given in a hospital setting. Ivermectin is not. Patients have very different characteristics, as you might expect. There were lots of things that they didn't control for, but he did the work and put the work out in a conference as an abstract. And it was part of this conference last year. And just last week, the conference abstracts were published in a special issue, as happens very often in journals. They'll associate with a conference, have a special issue with conference abstracts. Now, in the meantime, Yakov and his co-workers wrote up a full paper, sent it out. They got feedback. They had identified, and the reviewers apparently identified, a number of issues that ultimately made them decide not to move forward with it because it wasn't strong enough. Now, as a young scientist, as a young researcher, Yakov is learning a lot. And
all right, yeah, I mean, that's basically the story. And he pulled it. He pulled it. He said, we're going to pull it because we found out, because I'm, young and learning, and found out there were problems with the study.
And I would just like to say the whole idea that it was involved in this conference to begin with is proof against the sort of Brett Weinstein and all these charlatan narratives that it's not being looked into, and it was always being looked into. And there was this mix of between like, oh, it's being centered in the media versus there's a conspiracy of the doctors to suppress this, which is what all like the Weinstein and a lot of Joe Rogan's gurus were suggesting. And that was a complete lie.
A complete lie. It was their own ignorance about the way these papers get developed and about how the research happens that made them think that there was some type of conspiracy to keep this down. This is a perfect example of it. They hijack the process. They jump into it at one point where it is not, this is not evidence. It's basically it's basically watching like a detective go around saying like, this guy's interviewing people.
I would recommend, there's a Skeptic's Guide to the Universe podcast that I've liked. It was one of the earliest podcasts I got into. And if you listen to any show like that, you find out that you can't trust just one study of anything being even given a news release, right? Like there's all this sort of like scientists found a study that says like drinking wine makes you like jump high or something like that. And like there's individual studies can say a lot, but the process of science is reproducibility and stuff like that. And they're basically like capitalizing on people's ignorance of that sort of dynamic.
And I think also operating on their own ignorance of that dynamic, and also an inflated sense of self, and a persecution complex, and a desire for clicks. And when all of those things converge, it is like an overwhelming tsunami of incentives. And this is a great example. Now, but of course, like the 3,000 hits that this guy got, the 200 likes that the author of the study got will compare to nothing, because I have no doubt it's not stopping with Jordan Peterson or the British nurse guy. And that once it goes to those guys, it just like spouts out, and they're all going to be, within days, they're going to be talking about this. Tim Pool's going to be talking about that ivermectin study, which shows in Florida that it was more of remdesivir. And the fact that I'm saying remdesivir shows that I really know what I'm talking about, because they compared it to ivermectin. So come on. I mean, this is, and yes, the ivermectin thing, it's old news. It's irrelevant, but they're still fighting this war. And there's a reason why they're doing it. Is because they're trying to maintain their credibility when all of the evidence suggests that they have no credibility. So it's important for you to spread that video. We'll put a link to that guy's video in this, when we cut this up in our description. We should also put a link to the Twitter exchange too, I guess, although this is good enough. But honestly,
there's a few folks that won't respond. There's a guy, Debunk the Funk, I think is his. I'm looking for it now. I can't find it. But and then another woman who we've played, and including this Professor Jeff or Professor Greg, that and like Campbell won't really engage with them. He says they're just looking for clout.
Right,
so.
Right. That is the way that you protect your rear guard. Anybody who is in the business of supposedly informing the public and uses clout as I'm not going to talk to them because they're a clout chaser. I think we have shown that we will talk to some of the greatest, most self-proclaimed clout chasers in the world. Because the best way to stop a clout chaser from getting at least the proper clout is to show that they're full of it. All right. A couple IMs, then we'll get out of here. Mopping up. Sam, I'll be honest. I think your guest missed China in the larger economic equation regarding Russia's actions. China building new refineries announced today to refine cheap Russian oil, and India can easily absorb the grain exports Russia has. Meanwhile, America's effed out of the world's biggest nickel exporter. This will hurt Russia in the short term, but America and Europe are screwed on the long term. MSNBC eater. Price controls are being floated on Business Insider. Seems like a good sign. Prairie Fire Kowalski. Sam, so I have some rather conservative friends or rather neighbors who I got to live with that I think I finally found an argument to get them to understand the harm and the lack of education on the mental and physical health of trans kids to overwhelming majority of cis parents and children. If you think it is confusing to teach kids to understand trans issues, imagine the trauma your child will go through when their bullying of trans classmates lead to suicide. We know that, I don't know of a better term, slut shaming causes this, and the impact on the bullies is really bad, leading to anxiety and depression. Sucks you've got to make it personal to these people, but harm reduction is my primary goal locally. Leftist poggers. Interesting. Tomal Fink, I know you've been discussing trans rights on the show recently. Less than 3 years ago, liberals here in Britain were lauding J.K. Rowling as a bastion of kindness because she doesn't like Nigel Farage. Just goes to show that the enemy of one enemies is not necessarily one's friend. Yes, I learned that during the Bush years.
Yeah, J.K. Rowling's preparing the whole. She might be a Dave Rubin guest, and Ben Bash, who I follow on Twitter, he made the joke that they'd be the first guest that Dave Rubin has done the reading for.
Sleepy puppy. The irony on us not setting up any system for future COVID is Wall Street is upset with China's lockdown. The expectation is systems should have been established. Really cool. Yeah, this has the potential. The Chinese lockdowns. I've read competing ideas, but you should be aware this has the potential of screwing up our economy, of course, because we are not durable in this regard. Really cool. Get Deep State from Cuba. This is Revolution Podcast. He's an expert on Ukraine, Poland, Russia region. Can give historical material analysis, context. The Roman Polanski tweet was satire until it wasn't. Who's laughing now, Sam? Roman Polanski was satire. Skippy.
Cuba's great also. How
was Barcelona? Sam, the DIGA seems to have been stuck for a while. Do you think it matters? Is that the Dow Jones? Is that the DIGA? Jones and wait, what is it? Dow Jones Industrial Average.
Is this going to be a trap somehow?
I don't know. I don't follow the stock market. Late boomer. To criticize McFaul's assertions and form an argumentation, you don't have to go on and assert that Putin has only modest expansionist plans either. He's still a better ruthless imperialist and maybe slightly better than Hitler, or maybe not. He also has nukes, unlike Hitler. I'm not saying that his plans aren't expansionist. I'm just thinking that like his capacity seems to be not as what he thought they would be anyways. Starburst. Ben Shapiro's Sunday special with Maher is nauseating, but Maher pushed back way harder than I expected.
Also, if Hitler could have had nukes, he would have. He just expelled a lot of folks who were central into knowing how to do that.
All right, 3 more. Buster Snatch. Woohoo. Mondays are the best days of the week. Starting with the Alex Salmon fan club, signing you up all as members. What a hunk. Bear at home too. Sam, if you already signed up for the quickie, is there a discount too? Yes, look at the quickie and you'll see the coupon code. It is in the quickie. Salty line cook. Just wondering if you remember that old movie PCU with Jeremy Piven and David Spade. I never saw it, but I do remember it. Stellar cinematic critique of 90s college culture. Brooklyn boy. Bill Maher should ask Ben how much the right cares about free speech, especially when talking about gay people in Florida schools. Dank Uger, always take medical advice from someone who spent a year in a coma and gets terror from apple juice. Juicy, hearing that drop from Matt at the beginning of the show made me tear up with joy. And the final IM of the day. I admit I got. I realized after that, speaking of the Angry Bird, the birds aren't real. After that it was satire on Friday. I listened instead of watching on YouTube, so maybe that was a factor. Well, I will have to say, as a comment on my acting abilities, and of course his, wrong. You would have been fooled even more so on YouTube. Sorry. Matt, great job today. Bradley, great job today. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes